like to welcome you back to a very special policy panel. My name's Damien Grimshaw, Director of Research here at the ILO. Before getting into the panel, we're going to watch a short 1.5-minute video. And this is a video about the production of the bags that you've all received from Zimbabwe. We're going to see a short film about this now. Thank you.
Old rags, new bags. Worn as clothes, textiles are a beautiful thing. But dumped on the streets, they're an ugly nuisance. Like in Zimbabwe's capital, Harare, where waste collection is often inefficient. That bothers 22-year-old Gladys Chibanda. So she collects the leftover fabric at tailor shops and uses it to create beautiful clothing for objects like notebooks and diaries, or even picture frames, shoes and gift bags. Her recycled products sell for $2 to $25. They make life prettier and the environment a little cleaner.
Do you like that? If you are also doing your bit, tell us about it. Visit our website or send us a tweet. #DoingYourBit. We share your stories.
Great. That was a really nice start to the policy. Let's try and keep up the momentum. So as I said, I'm Damien Grimshaw from the Research Department, and I'm very happy to have the chance to moderate this policy panel. Part of its motivation is to bring back views from the previous 3 parallel sessions. And we'll do that with the experts on my right, who I'll introduce in a moment. It's very important in our research at the ILO to build research capacities and knowledge on the new and transformative approach to thinking about and applying models of economic development. We know this needs a hugely different and transformative approach, and the ILO needs to be at the center of those debates in influencing policy. And of course, working for a sustainable planet and social justice for its people has to be at the core of that. And I very much hope and believe that will be part of the ILO's vision in its research. What's interesting about the transformative approach is that it requires interconnections, interlinkages. I think we're all using these words today and in our work outside here. We see a lot of interconnections in the room, different agencies, different organizations. We have business representatives, trade unions, governments, from many different countries represented. I'm also happy to say that the work within the ILO on this theme also involves lots of interconnections. We have a representation from CEDEFOP, who were an important agency collaborating with us, but also very nice collaboration within departments and among departments. Research, the skills branch, Greening with Jobs, and others. So that's really nice to see. And I think it's part of the spirit of this transformative approach that we have these interconnections. So that's great. So I want to have a couple of rounds of questions with our 3 experts. Let me introduce them in turn as I ask them each individual questions. They've had a little bit of time to think about the answers. Unfortunately, we've only got it was a 30-minute panel, and we've started late, but 30 minutes is already not very much. But I will try and keep them to time, so apologies for that in advance. So I want to start with a question for Catherine Saget, who's from the Research Department and was the lead author of last year's flagship World Employment Social Outlook report called Greening with Jobs. So she comes with a lot of expertise in this area. Now, Catherine, I understand you were in session 3, which was looking at skills development in sustainable development. So based on this discussion, what do you think would be the key elements in a policy mix for skills for green jobs and a just transition?
Thank you, Damien. We had a very good, a very lively discussion in session 3, and just to give you a little flavor for those who couldn't attend this session, before I come to your question, Damien, we had good examples of skills identification in the countries in the digital world. We had the good practice on national classification of occupation, which is something so important for skills development for green job and for other type of skill development. The constraints, the particular constraint of developing country came out very strongly. SMEs, also Spain also mentioned the particular constraint for developing skills faced by SMEs. The size of the informal economy, the lack of social dialogue, and the very high unemployment rate. 2 countries amongst the 5-6 countries we had 13% unemployment rate. And of course, the drivers of the future of work. Then the divide between developing and developed country also came through adult education. Mostly adult education is important in OECD countries, it's important in Spain, but even if we take countries in Latin America, the 6 countries where active labor market policy would be the highest in that region would on average spend only 0.3% of the GDP on active labor market policy. This is one of the results of last year's report on active labor market policy in Latin America of the research department. And then finally, something really interesting was one of the panelists mentioned something we often forget when we think of skills development. We think of, okay, it's important for productivity, it's important to get higher, better wages, it's important to ensure people to be mobile. But it's also very important for occupational safety and health purposes. And in the context of greening of economy, I think this is a very important point. Now, coming to your question, Chair, I think essentially there were 3 building blocks of a sound skills development for a just transition, which came from our discussion. First is that it is very important that there is integration of skills development in the national green strategies. But equally important is that environmental policy should also think about the implication of achieving environmental targets for policy development, for training, for education policies. For instance, I mean, this is happening. There are positive development. For instance, in energy efficiency regulation, there is a strong recognition that skilled workers, such as energy auditors, are needed to make the transition to cleaner energy use. And due to this recognition, skills development for those occupations happen. And interestingly, we had in the panel experts of skills development coming from different countries and bringing their own expertise or function as representative of the social partners. And the way to think of, just to give you an example, the G20 meeting on sustainability, environmental sustainability. So it's a meeting of ministers of the environment, and the ILO gets to be invited to this meeting, and it's unbelievable. It's just amazing to see how much specialists of the environment, so people with very different skills than all of us, probably with some exception, they are very much interested in our expertise. They also want to bridge the gap. It's us taking their constraint, but it's also the other way around. Now, the second building block, which is important for developing skills for green job, is the systematic collection and analysis of labor market information. It came very strongly in our panel. It's a very important basis for the revision of professional qualification standards and training curricula. And here I would just like to mention that actually there's been huge progress on this area. And if you go to the website of the ILO Department of Statistics, you will see that as many as 140 labor force surveys can be accessed. I'm talking about the raw data. So huge, very important to continue this positive trend. And finally, the third building block is the establishment of institutional mechanism and participation of social partners in social dialogue. Social dialogue is important for efficiency, for sharing information purposes. It is also important to bring employers in the skills development platform because this reduces the skills mismatch. It is important to bring workers' side as well because it brings better equity purposes. It increases the access of women, of unemployed, of low-skilled workers to skills and training. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. That was a very nice summary. We'll come back with another round of questions. I want to ask now a question to Stelina Chatzicristo, who's an expert. I asked her before the panel what her job title was, and quite simple over at Cedefop, expert. So maybe senior expert, I don't know, or special expert. Yeah. So that's, she has special expertise on the area of technical vocational education and training, and that's the session she attended just before this panel. So I'd like to ask her, summing up and also reflecting on your own expertise, why are technical vocational education training interventions, why are they an important component in the policy mix for skills for a just transition? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question, and very briefly I would like to warmly thank the ILO for the collaboration we had in developing the national studies and for inviting us in this global forum. I was really privileged to attend the session on greening TVET because we were given the opportunity to listen to experiences of countries that face very different economic realities, not only regarding greening of economy, but overall. And they, having also a presentation by ETF and UNESCO UNEVOC, we were provided with examples and challenges of countries that represent very different also political and societal trajectories to this point. So absolutely the provision of TVET is an indispensable component of any policy mix because without the provision of relevant skills, there can be no actual development, no progress in sectoral level and therefore at national level. At a sectoral level, of course, it's easy, I guess, to identify the need for those sectors that are currently booming. It's mainly for the renewable energies, but also depending on the country. We've heard agriculture, even horticulture being highlighted in Zimbabwe. So at sectoral level, there can be and have to be specific and targeted interventions at sectoral level in order to address the needs of the sector at the specific country. At the same time, we've heard of examples and respective TVET interventions for sectors that unfortunately face very negative effects due from one hand to the greening of economy. Ms. Rosenblatt from OSCA highlighted the quite severe for the standards of Estonia number of laid-offs from the oil companies, that these people have to be protected in order not to stay in unemployment, ideally not to be in unemployment at all. So TVET can be the mechanism in order to provide the skills for career shifts, mobility of employees, and for those sectors for those employees already in jobs, for sure, it's important to reskill and upskill them in order to catch up with the changing relevant technologies. So it's important to highlight, it's also from our experience in Cedefop, but it was very evident from the session how TVET is the mechanism and can be an effective mechanism to tackle skill mismatches at various levels and degrees. At the same time, TVET cannot be, all Greeks do that, I'll use a Greek word. It's not a panacea, in the sense that it has to be a part of a policy mix. It has to be well linked, interwoven with other policies. We've heard of examples and challenges regarding fragmentation of policies which hinder actual progress at the implementation level from, for example, South Africa, regardless the very strong social dialogue elements. This is a very good example of how interesting and how important it is, particularly for the skills for green jobs, to have TVET policies developed in collaboration with relevant ministries and organizations. At the same time, the establishment of national policies of TVET, so not in just void of sector or local level, are very important in some countries such as Germany. It was very interesting to hear, it was underlined by the expert Mr. Patuzzi, that in a country with such a strong and very effective role of the social partners, it is indeed the importance of a national agenda in TVET that can actually drive the change. So it's a very important perspective, I would say, in several countries. We see that in our research in EU countries as well, but today I've heard that it's in other parts of the world. Although it's so important to have TVET as part of the policy mix, it's important to have it as let's say, as an outcome, as supported elements of skills anticipation. Mr. Auger highlighted this. We had the opportunity of hearing the very strong approach Estonia has developed based on social partners' contributions. The importance of forming TVET, having listened to the needs of the social partners, someone can accuse me now of repeating cliches, but we can say that we know the 2-3 values, but it's important to hear the actual countries highlighting their reality reflected in them. So I would very much welcome, and I will take it with me, the example of South Africa that has signaled the importance of not only the tripartite approach, but tripartite +1. So in an area of skills, such as green skills and respectively TVET, it's so important to have TVET that also raises awareness about the importance of green occupations and green economy. It's such a societal issue that the citizens and societies and civil organizations need also to be involved in the formulation of relevant agendas, policies, and respectively programs and curricula.
Great. Thanks very much. Apologies for having to hold up a piece of paper here. Now I'd like to ask a question to Mr. Mustafa Gay, who's, as many people know, is the coordinator of the Green Jobs Programme here at the ILO. So I think we were at the same session just now together on sectoral approaches. So I think it's a given that sectoral approaches ought to be the part of the policy mix for a just transition. So, I mean, how does this manifest itself? I mean, how does it look? So in what ways should sector policies be included in the policy mix for a just transition? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Damien. I think there have been very interesting ideas that came from the discussion on sectoral perspectives. First, on why is it important to take sectoral perspectives in policy formulation and coordination. The first important message is that different economic sectors have different realities. The agricultural sector is different from the energy sector, manufacturing is different from construction, and so therefore the investment flows that you have in there, the type of workers, occupations that you see in those industries, the need and challenges that they face in terms of anticipating benefiting, the skills, they're different. So therefore, it's important to understand the realities of these different sectors. But having said that, one important message that came across is that taking a sector approach doesn't mean going into those sectors in isolation from the rest of the economy. So therefore, as much as it's important to look at energy and the realities in the energy sector, we know energy is a backbone of the economy. It feeds into agriculture. It feeds into manufacturing. So therefore, impacts in one sector affect other economic sectors, so which means that these cross-sectoral impacts need to be taken into consideration, and sometimes how they impact on vulnerable communities. Now, quickly on the how, I think there was a very important message that understanding the realities of economic sectors needs to be done through analytical work. There are tools and approaches that allow us to measure what could be the needs and demands for skills and how to anticipate them in different economic sectors. So in the ILO, we have modeling approaches that we use with our partners to do that, and that analytical work, as was done in the weather report, shows why it is important and how it can be done. Then the other important message was what was just said about multi-stakeholder engagement and the importance of social dialogue, and sometimes, as we say, through a tripartite plus process, which can lead to bottom-up processes, which leads into and feeds into the overall policy formulation. And finally, on the how, there was an emphasis on what the private sector can bring in this process. Sometimes skills councils can be a vehicle, and where private sector companies can offer mentorship and other mechanisms that allow for skills needs to be bridged. So therefore, to recap, it's important, but on the how, there are some important points to take into account, and the cross-sectoral nature of this work is also an important message that came in the discussions.
Great, thanks very much. I'm so tempted to ask lots of follow-up questions, but I don't think I'm allowed to. So I'm going to, for the sake of time now, I think, ask all the panelists for one sort of chance for further reflection in general, partly because this is what we've agreed, so I want to stick to my roadmap here. So if I can turn to Catherine first and ask you, perhaps say in a couple of minutes, I mean, what would be your key takeaway for policymakers and others working on skills for green jobs and a just transition? So what would be the things you'd want to highlight in a message?
Well, if I had to choose one sentence, I'd be very tempted to say labor is not a commodity. This resonates very strongly with the centenary discussion, the centenary celebration at the ILC this month. But also it really embeds the approach, the ILO approach to skills for a just and equitable transition. So what we're talking about here is really about policy development, policy implementation, policy monitoring, which is based on solid evidence, which is based on analytical and on data, and of course on social dialogue. So I think that if you can summarize that with labor is not a commodity, I think that would be my sentence.
Maybe we're going back to Palani, who said that not only labor is not a commodity, but also land and money, right? But maybe we want to say land and water and energy. Anyway, Stelina, I think you're next. So similar chance for you to highlight what would be in your policy mix. Thank you.
I would say to a policymaker that perhaps the first steps to take is to develop a green dictionary. I heard it many times today that we may think all people understand what we're talking about, but this is not necessarily true. So no matter the level that an initiative is being formulated, evaluated, or anything else, I would suggest that, first of all, those involved, which can be tripartite plus one for sure, should sit together and identify what exactly green skills mean for them, what it means for their sector and for their programs and for their society. And very much linked to that, it was much highlighted in the session I attended by UNESCO UNEVOC, the need to do what in a way we try to do instead of provide skills intelligence, which means there are data and information, but policymakers should make sure that this is broken down to more plain language and convince people from the citizen, from the parent that will take the child to a TVET program relevant to green job, to the high level in an industry about why it's important to change the behavior, to make investments, to trust and take steps in an unstable environment.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Mustafa, would you like to also take the chance to highlight what you would put in a policy mix? Thanks.
Well, I think I would start about having the right narrative when it comes to just transition and the important role that skills play in having that right and positive narrative. I think there's a very good understanding of the nature and the scale of changes in labor markets that a transition to sustainability will cause. What we need to have is a better understanding of what it means in different economic sectors and the notion that the right skills for smooth transition in labor markets will make this transition possible and act as an enabler, whereas the lack of skills would lead to obstacles and political resistance because there will be fear for jobs. So therefore, there is a positive narrative, but to get to that positive narrative, getting the right skills, anticipating those skills would be an important enabler. Being absent, it could lead to strong political resistance.
Do you see problems, perhaps Stalina as well, of raising investment for skill development and issues of shared financing? In our Global Commission on the Future of Work, it's highlighted quite strongly the need for some form of shared financing, but of course there's no detail there. I mean, what would be your sort of conclusions on that or advice on that?
It is a touchy subject in many EU countries. And from our experience, although it's not our focal point of research, it is a matter also of national culture. Nonetheless, it's been proved that if social partners are also contributing, there is, of course, more involvement. What we have seen in other contexts is that in country sectors where financial contributions are not possible, then there can be discussions about contributions in kind, for example, running an employer survey or engaging their members to be more active at local level. But for sure, in informal such partnerships, contributions of all partners involved can really make a difference in implementation and sustainability.
Thanks. There's a bit of a perhaps unexpected question. Thanks for that. Now, in my notes here, it says that this morning, apparently there was a poll, and I believe we have some results from that poll. Are you willing to share those results? You do have them?
Yes,
it seems very exciting.
We do have a poll. We did a Slido poll, and thank you, colleagues, for having responded to this question. So there were 3 questions. The first one was to look at what would be the 2 most important type of skills for green jobs, and I think that's what you have right now on the top, on the screen. What comes on the top is the core work skills. So therefore, problem-solving skills, communication skills, that you can take across different economic sectors. And right below it are the so-called STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And what is actually interesting in this is that in the 2011 report, it was pointed as one of the major obstacles for in the transition to sustainability. So therefore, it's important that colleagues have pointed to this as one of the two most important types of skills. The second question, if we have it now on the screen, was to consider which three sectors have the largest green skills gaps. What we have on the top is the construction sector. I think 67% of respondents pointed to construction, followed by manufacturing, 47%, and then agriculture, forestry, and fishing. So actually, it's interesting that agriculture comes here because often when we discuss it, it's not given so much attention. I think it's important that this has come into our discussion. And thirdly, the question was about what prevents effective skills policies for a green transition. And obviously, what we were just talking about, this notion of lack of policy coordination, is what is coming on the top with 63% of respondents, and the lack of institutional and technical capacities. I think this illustrates what we also see in countries where we work, and the lack of coordination in particular among different parts of governments and working with social partners in policy coordination and anticipation. So again, thank you everybody for having responded to this, and we'll try to draw on it as we go forward. Thank you.
Well, that's really excellent. Yeah, thanks very much. I think I want to bring this to a close quite swiftly because we're going to do a quick turnaround with the next session, which is entitled Skills Development and Lifelong Learning for the Future of Work in a Greener Economy, which is what we need to do. So thanks very much to our three experts. That was really good of you. Thanks very much.